It all started on a quiet summer evening at Lake Willow Creek, a place that once meant peace but became a battleground. My cabin sits at the end of a dirt road, nestled among pines and overlooking the water. I inherited it from my dad, and every weekend, I'd drive up after work to escape the city's noise. The traffic, the alarms, the emails. It was my sanctuary. A place where the only sounds were loons calling, wind in the trees, and the occasional splash of a fish jumping. The lake's homeowners association had rules, sure, rules about docks, septic tanks, and no loud parties after 10 p.m. But parking. That was simple. The cabin has a long gravel driveway with room for 2 vehicles. My boat trailer sat off to the side, and I usually parked my old truck at the top so I could unload gear easily. Then came her, the HOA's self-appointed enforcer, Karen Pearson. She lived a few lots up. She'd show up every Saturday morning in her white SUV, storming down the road with a clipboard like she owned the place. She was friendly enough, at least until her car appeared behind mine in the driveway. At first, it was minor. She'd leave laminated notices on the windshield, unauthorized vehicle, please park outside cabin lot, and HOA enforcement notice number 003. Each one had a scannable QR code and a link to their online portal, then another link to pay a parking fine. I brushed it off. Maybe she didn't know the layout. Maybe it was a mistake. Every weekend, she was there, strategically parking facing my cabin. She didn't wave. She didn't smile. She just watched. One morning, I pulled in at 5:30 a.m. By 5:45, Karen's SUV rolled in behind me. By 6 o'clock, she was down by the dock, waving at my neighbor while her SUV blocked the driveway. I couldn't ignore it anymore. I called the HOA president, Mr. Williams. He was polite, but talked in doublespeak. The association encourages designated areas for guest parking. And we're working on signage. And parking near docks can interfere with emergency access. All polite. Zero action. Karen didn't wait. The next weekend, another notice. The weekend after, another. Fines began stacking up. $50, $75, $100 for each violation. I paid them, at first, just to keep things quiet. But then she got bold. I rented a jet ski one Saturday and towed it behind my truck. As I backed out of the driveway, I saw her in the rearview mirror, stepping out of her SUV, staging for a photo of my rig, like she was collecting evidence. She even snapped one with her phone, pointed it right at my tow hitch. I turned off, locked the cabin, and drove back to the city fuming. That Monday, I called again. Mr. Williams gave me the same empty promises. He said, "She's a volunteer enforcement officer. She's just doing her job." I asked for a written map of parking zones. He didn't reply. I spent nights drawing my own maps, marking boundaries, taking pictures of empty driveways, noticing the only time she'd park was mine. I remembered the words of my dad. If someone's pushing on your door, you get to decide whether to open or shut it. So I shut it. That Friday, instead of heading up after work, I drove a few hours early. I had a plan. I pulled into the driveway, carefully noting the angle. I backed up to the point where Karen's rear bumper would just touch mine. I turned off the truck. Then I grabbed my welding gear from the back. 5 minutes later, sparks flew as I welded the 2 SUV doors shut, driver side and passenger side. I closed each weld with precision, enough to be watertight, but still reversible with tools. I wiped off the slag and tossed them a note. "Please respect parking. Have a great weekend." I left a video camera out by the SUV, aimed at the door. Then I locked up the cabin and left. No weekend at all. I headed straight back to town and into a rented Airbnb for 10 days. I turned off my phone. No emails. No HOA portal checks. I closed the door on their mountain rules, and let time do the rest. When I returned to Lake Willow Creek 10 days later, the air was heavy with tension, thicker than the usual pine-scented breeze that curled around the cabin each morning. I pulled in slowly, gravel crunching under the tires. And there she was, Karen's white SUV, still sitting in the exact same position, right where I'd left it. The bright yellow sticky note I had written was gone, but in its place were 3 HOA violation tags taped to my garage door. One of them stamped in red, "Final warning." I climbed out, casually walked toward the SUV, and smiled to myself. Both doors still sealed shut. She had tried to pry the welds. The metal around the driver's side was scuffed and marred, and I could see fine shavings on the ground, clearly from a drill or some desperate tool attempt. It didn't work. She had called someone, probably 2 or 3 someones, and none of them managed to get it open without risking damaging her vehicle. What she didn't know was that the welds were designed to release, only with my grinder. I'd made sure they were clean and controlled. This wasn't vandalism. This was restraint. That's when I saw the camera I'd left, still intact, still recording. I popped the memory card into my laptop and scrolled through the footage while sipping coffee on the porch. Day 1. Karen walked around the SUV, frantically tapping her phone. Day 2. 2 HOA board members arrived. They stared at the doors, took photos, and left. Day 3. Karen screamed into a cell phone, paced for hours, then sat in a lawn chair beside the SUV with crossed arms. Day 4. A tow truck came, but the operator refused to move the vehicle once he saw the welds. Liability. Day 5 through 8. No visitors. Just Karen. Sweating. Fuming. Waiting. And here's the kicker. Karen had parked in front of my steel workshop garage door. A door I never used from the outside, except for winter gear and fishing tools. She must have thought she was blocking me from enjoying my lake life. But the irony was, she had locked herself out of hers. I grabbed a folding chair, set it beside the SUV, and made a show of drinking cold beer beside her vehicle. No music. Just the soft crackle of a campfire. By sunset, a sheriff's cruiser rolled up the gravel road. Deputy Wells stepped out. He'd been here before, for noise complaints, mostly from Karen. "Afternoon," he said, nodding politely. "Mind if I ask about the vehicle?" "Not mine," I said, sipping again. "I see that," he smirked, walking around the SUV. "Someone reported vandalism." I handed him the footage. His eyebrows raised as he skimmed through the highlights. "She parked on your private property?" I nodded. He gave a long sigh. "She's on the board. Thinks that gives her jurisdiction over everything." "Board or not," I said, "she's been issuing fraudulent tickets, blocking my property, and violating the association's own codes." He didn't argue. "Look, I can't condone the welding. That's a civil matter. But the footage. It's solid. She trespassed. Repeatedly. Karen must have been watching from somewhere because within 10 minutes, she stormed down the hill, sunburned and flustered, clipboard in hand. She waved a sheaf of papers like she was serving a subpoena. "This man vandalized my vehicle," she screeched. Wells raised a hand. "Ma'am, I reviewed the footage. You parked here without permission. For over a week." "I'm on the board," she yelled. "I was enforcing community regulations." Wells pointed to the gravel beneath her SUV. "And your tires have created a groove. That's private damage, not enforcement." She sputtered. "I had to stay. I was documenting repeated infractions." I cut in. "Or were you just trying to bait me? Because if you were, it worked." She turned beet red. Deputy Wells sighed again. "Here's what I recommend. Both parties walk away. No charges. But the SUV leaves today." "I can't even open it," Karen shouted. "Then you better find a way," I said, cool as the beer in my hand. The next morning, I heard it, the unmistakable grind of a portable saw. Karen had hired someone. Finally. 2 guys with torches and cutting wheels tried to break the welds, but I'd done the job right. Every seam was protected with layered angles. They had to cut into the frame to release the doors, meaning the vehicle was now legally damaged by her own hired hands. Later that day, A flatbed towed the SUV out, dragging a piece of her pride along with it. She didn't wave goodbye. But Karen wasn't done. The next HOA meeting, scheduled for that Saturday, was posted in all caps on the bulletin board. Mandatory attendance, enforcement policy updates. Oh, I attended. I showed up with copies of every fine she had issued, each with photos showing my truck parked squarely on my gravel lot. I brought the drone footage I'd captured that showed her car parked illegally, blocking a fire lane by the lake. And I brought the camera footage, unedited. The meeting started polite. It ended in chaos. Mr. Williams tried to regain order. Let's be civil. I have 3 years of targeted harassment, I said, my voice calm but loud. And I have proof. Karen didn't speak. She sat there, eyes wide, arms folded. She knew. When the footage of her camping beside my cabin played, someone in the back muttered, "Is she serious?" Another whispered, "That's creepy." By the end, Williams sighed. "We'll be reviewing enforcement powers. Effective immediately, board members are no longer allowed to self-issue citations." Someone clapped. Then 2 more joined in. Karen stood and stormed out without a word. The following week felt quieter. Not just around the cabin, but in the entire neighborhood. The kind of quiet that comes when a storm has passed, and everyone is waiting to see what's left standing. Karen's SUV was gone. The final warning signs were peeled off my garage door. And for the first time in months, I could sip coffee on my porch without seeing a clipboard bobbing over the hedges. But the silence wasn't just a relief, it was a setup. 3 days after the HOA meeting meltdown, I received a formal certified letter in the mail. HOA branded envelope. Heavy paper. Her signature. Inside was a thick packet filled with accusations: property misuse, community defiance, harassment, and endangering neighborhood harmony. She'd even included a black and white photo of my truck parked too close to the easement line. As if that was her smoking gun. But here's where Karen overplayed her hand. She had filed for a special board hearing to address my conduct. It was scheduled for the following Saturday, and the letter made it sound official, as if this hearing would determine whether I was allowed to keep my property in the HOA. There was just one problem. She had no legal grounds. The HOA bylaws, buried in 36 pages of legalese, stated clearly that any removal of privileges or issuance of fines required majority board approval. Karen, after the incident, had lost her vote. The other 2 members, Williams and Ortega, had already distanced themselves. They didn't want the heat. Still, I saw the opportunity. If she wanted a formal hearing, I'd give her one she'd never forget. Saturday arrived. The board set up in the community center, same place where local bake sales and HOA potlucks were usually held. Folding chairs. A long plastic table. Karen sat in the center, arms crossed, posture stiff like she'd memorized her lines. Her clipboard was back, and so was her smug confidence. I didn't come alone. I brought a small projector, a large monitor, a laptop, and my neighbor Rick, who just so happened to be a retired property attorney. I didn't even have to ask. Once he heard what Karen had done to my place, he volunteered to tag along for entertainment. Karen opened the meeting. "I have documented consistent behavioral violations from Mr. Reynolds," she began, straightening her collar like she was on trial at the Supreme Court. "His actions threaten the integrity of our neighborhood and disregard the values this HOA was founded upon." I stood and nodded politely. "Before we proceed," I said calmly, "I'd like to submit a few clarifying materials into the record." Williams sighed. "Go ahead." Click. I powered up the projector. Slide 1. A timeline of her harassment. Dated citations, each one annotated with corresponding photographic proof of false claims. Slide 2. Aerial drone shots from multiple weekends, showing her SUV parked illegally near fire lanes, lake docks, and even across multiple driveways. Slide 3. The footage, unedited, of her pacing around my property while I was gone. Talking to herself. Camping out in a chair. yelling into the void. The room shifted. Ortega leaned forward. Williams rubbed his temple. Karen didn't say a word. But the final slide was the coup de grace. A signed letter from Rick, written on letterhead, stating that any continued false citation from Karen, or misuse of HOA authority, could result in legal liability for harassment, trespassing, and abuse of power under state law. Karen stood abruptly. This is a smear campaign. He's manipulating the narrative. Rick cleared his throat. Ma'am, I've reviewed the bylaws personally. You are operating well outside of protocol. And the board has no legal basis for this hearing. Williams held up his hand. That's enough. The room went silent. I move to suspend Karen from any HOA authority until further legal review, he said flatly. I second, Ortega muttered. And that was it. The clipboard stayed on the table. Karen didn't pick it up. She stormed out, her heels clicking furiously across the linoleum like punctuation marks of a defeated villain. But poetic justice wasn't finished. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from the HOA, official this time. It apologized. They had reviewed my documentation, confirmed the false citations, and rescinded all warnings previously issued to my property. Karen, now facing formal action, had been stripped of her position. A new election would be held to replace her seat. I could have left it there. But you know what? I didn't. Instead, I nominated myself for the board. Not because I cared about the power. Not because I wanted to enforce ridiculous rules. But because if someone like Karen could sit in that chair for 5 years unchecked, I wanted to make sure no one else ever used it as a throne again. Election night was simple. I ran unopposed. When the votes were counted, I became the newest member of the HOA. And my first official motion? A proposal to remove the ban on gravel driveways. The crowd clapped. Some stood. Rick winked from the back row. Karen didn't attend. These days, the cabin is more peaceful than ever. Neighbors stop by to say hello. We trade beers on weekends. No one measures lawn height with a ruler anymore. And as for the steel garage doors, I left one weld mark untouched, just a small scar along the seam as a reminder. Not to others. To me. Because in the end, I didn't get revenge by yelling louder or stooping to her level. I got it by playing her game better, and making sure no one ever plays it again.